Welcome to the Archangel's Feast podcast. For this conversation, I sat down with Mike again, and we talked about a few things which weren't really planned. It was kind of a rambling conversation, but I think there were three overarching themes which segued pretty nicely into one another. For the first about half hour, we opened with a discussion about like what makes Christianity unique and what makes Catholicism unique. We talked about redemption and martyrdom, truth and violence, nonviolence and pacifism, and then confession and forgiveness of sins. And then for about 15 minutes after that, we talked about identity and culture and preserving a culture you mostly agree with. And then lastly, I kind of spoon fed him the sour medicine of my own philosophical project, which is an experience based way of arguing for religious ideas. Um, so that's the long and short of it. Hope you enjoy. Thanks for tuning in.
Also, this is lovely as a drink.
Oh, isn't it nice?
Yeah.
It's the Fireball, the ginger ale, and the apple juice.
Yeah, it's like it is very sweet though.
Yeah. Oh, that's my thing.
Yeah. Like the only way you could make it sweeter is if you were to literally just dump sugar in here.
I'm not a super sweet person.
Oh, yeah.
I need supplements.
Yeah. I like a little more subtlety in sweetness. This is a little harsh, but it's good because the
Yeah.
ginger ale I think adds that little bit of spice to it that mixes well with the cinnamon. So you kind of get like feels kind of like a holiday cider or something like that.
Yeah. I don't know if I was kind of sloppy with your ratios and mine too.
Oh, I don't care.
It was a quick and dirty.
Yeah.
Just like this podcast, perfect segue.
Yup.
So I didn't really plan a topic. You brought up an idea. Maybe you could just start explaining what you had in mind.
Yeah, so I recently started a romantic relationship with a woman who is Reformed Jewish, and we share a lot of good chemistry together. But it kind of made me think, like, we shared a lot of similar theology and philosophy about things. So it made me ask, why would I tell someone specifically that I am a Christian or a Catholic? What is special and unique to Christianity and Catholicism that separates from anyone else, every other religion, that you can't get anywhere else?
I think it's I actually have a hard time with this, and the reason I have a hard time with this is this whole problem of how are religions actually different? Are they all kind of the same, or what are the differences? I tend to have a hard time explaining differences between Christianity, and the reason is my approach is more experience based, where it's like I try to understand what's the actual different experience. So for me, it's easier to distinguish between Christianity and Islam, because in Islam it's about submission to the will of God, and Christianity it's about a relationship with a father. And I could talk about that's just a different experience. And so for me, if I'm trying to talk about the different experiences, right, that's just my approach to things. Like I like when I'm talking with people and having a deep conversation, I just try to get down to like what are your raw experiences and what are the ideas you developed to get your arms around those experiences.
Yeah, and that, and also not everyone of the same faith is built in the same way. Their beliefs aren't. They're usually within the same framework, but not necessarily the same. So you talk to one Catholic, their experience of Catholicism may be vastly different from another Catholic, even though on paper all of their beliefs are the same.
That's actually measurably true. My sister's fiance, Jojo, he did some psychology studies, and it's on God attachment, and the idea was something like you can have like insecure or secure attachments to God in the same way that infants have like secure and insecure attachments to their parent.
Yeah.
And so you see variation in the way people perceive God. And that makes perfect sense. Like,
yeah.
People are different. We got different brains, and we see different sides of the coin.
Exactly. And like if we were to make like a religion for every individual experience, everyone would have their own religion. Yeah. Like pretty much like with some like except like or that or like everyone would there'd be like a million religions that like only like maybe double digit people fall into each box, you know.
Yeah.
So
And actually, so the question kind of becomes, well, what really is religion? And
yeah.
And I don't know if you want to go down that rabbit hole.
Well, I feel like that's its own discussion.
Yeah.
That's a little separate from this.
Sure.
Because like I could go into a whole rant about, okay, is it a framework of belief? Is it a method for granting meaning to masses? Like there's like so many different frameworks you could talk. There's so many frameworks that you could talk about religion as a framework.
Yeah.
So I would try to steer away from that area and focus more on like what makes Christianity Christian.
Sure.
Or like what makes Catholicism Catholic.
So how do you frame it? Like how have you been framing it recently? Like, are you trying to distinguish between Christianity and non-Christianity, or Catholicism and?
More so, I've been thinking about Christianity versus non-Christianity, and the reason why is because like I am a Catholic. I was raised Catholic and everything, but I do have those like tension points where I'm like, I'm not so sure about this or I'm not so sure about that, and if I force myself into a label, then I have to defend myself within that label. But if I can focus on, okay, let me get rid of the over legalistic label of Catholic and just focus on Christian for a moment.
Okay.
Why am I even a Christian at all, apart from like, you know, I was raised with it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, or like it's cultural to being Polish or something like that, you know. What is the like, and then from there I can then go into, okay, why would I label myself a Catholic? I'm secure in Christian, but why would that then be a Catholic versus some other sect of Christianity or like non-denominational or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's like aspects of that. So I would first want to start with what makes Christianity Christian and not anything else.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go.
So okay, so like one of my favorite things is actually the concept of like martyrdom.
Okay.
So fundamentally, the entire religion of Christianity is based in the concept of martyrdom because Jesus literally died to save the world, save humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that is core. Like every Christian like on the world basically believes that.
Yep.
Like there's not like that. Like maybe there's that one weirdo church that says like he didn't actually die or like he didn't do it to save us or something like that.
Yeah,
but
he
like
didn't have a body and he was walking 2 inches above the ground. He was kind of a ghost, and so he never really died.
Yeah, but for the most part, everyone acknowledges that Jesus Christ died to save the world.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really powerful because it puts in this message of your beliefs matter more than your own life, and and like, you know, the truth and morality and goodness values more than your individual life.
Okay. Let me add a shred of nuance and then see how you react to it. So you could also say Islam, they have martyrs and people die for their beliefs.
Yes.
But maybe the martyrdom in Christianity has to do with vicarious redemption.
Yes. So there are two things I want to say about that. One is every religion has martyrs, but they're not elevated to the special status as they are in Christianity. And furthermore, most other religions generally have clauses for doing things that are normally dishonest for the sake of like a greater good. So for example, in Islam, as you just mentioned, there's a practice called taqiyya, which is what I've heard it is, although it's oftentimes brought up by Islamophobes. But the idea is that if you're like in a dangerous situation as a Muslim where it's dangerous to be a Muslim, it's like you're in a country where Muslims are being persecuted, the Quran specifically makes a clause for you to say, to lie to people and say I'm not a Muslim to save your own life for
Okay.
this for the greater good of the church for the greater good of Islam. That like you just being a martyr is effectively less useful to them than for you to lie and pretend you're not a Muslim. So that way, later on, when things are better, you could effectively fight another battle and like keep the fight going longer than just like going out into the streets and getting shot.
So in Christianity, do you think we value martyrdom more, or do you think we value truth more?
Both. I think we value you because like the idea is in an ideal Christian world, martyrs wouldn't exist. We wouldn't. No one would need to die for their faith. So I would say that we hold our truth. We hold not. I say our truth, but I hate that term. I would say we hold truth in general to such a high degree, and we hold God to such a high degree that literally we are willing to die for truth and for God.
The funny thing with martyrs, though, is that they die for truth as they see it.
Yes. So and that's where you get into the whole like okay, every religion on earth has had people do bad things in the name of what they claim was good, But that's a problem in everything. Like you can't really get around that. That's just the evil inside men's hearts, you know.
That's another rabbit hole that I've been reflecting on a lot.
Yeah, I think that's its own conversation too, is the idea of like how do you know you're right when you're doing something if you're doing something big, cuz if I'm on a Friday day I can't eat meat, it's not a humongous spiritual decision to not eat meat. I'm not religiously feeling oh man, maybe God says I'm supposed to eat meat exclusively on Fridays. Man, it would be a bad idea for me to not. No, of course not. There are certain religious decisions you make that effectively have no consequences to their actions, whether or not you get them right or wrong, in terms of significant degree.
Like Age of the Earth.
Yeah.
No one actually. It doesn't actually matter to your spirituality what the number is.
Exactly.
It's just a number.
Exactly.
It's a big number.
But when you're okay. I'm risking going to jail or something like that because I want to protest something that the government's doing. How do you know you're right? Or or if especially when you get into even more serious things when it talks about just war. Your country sees let's say you're a Christian country and you see another country doing something evil, or similarly, or if you want to bring it back down to a small scale, imagine you see your neighbor doing something that is evil. How do you know you are right in stopping them?
Right.
And then that goes on various scales where it's okay, we generally will acknowledge that if a man is beating their wife, I guess you should intervene, call the cops, do something about it. Don't just do nothing. And then comparably, you have what's it called? But if they're just doing drugs, we don't like drugs as Christians. We generally think we should be pure. But the idea is, we're not so obsessed with it that sin that we feel we need to intervene and stop them immediately. We might give them more chance to redeem themselves or whatever.
I know a bunch of people that do.
Yeah. That you mean they do intervene?
They would prohibit drugs on the basis that it fucks
but
you up.
well, yes, but I'm saying that imagine you knew someone who had drugs and you went to their house or called the cops on them. That degree of hey, this is bad and I can't even morally stand you doing this to yourself, even if you are the most secularly acknowledged as safely consuming it.
Okay.
That's kind of the point is most Catholics aren't gonna go on lynch mobs trying to find people who have drugs in their houses.
No, that's true. maybe
but
activism tours of
yeah, or like
holding signs.
yeah, or like most Catholics aren't on massive crusades against drugs, but things like abortion is so like incredibly vile to the eyes of Catholics that people do go on massive like personal crusades against it, where they'll literally go to Washington and like march in the streets to call for its end. So like that's kind of the point I'm making, is that certain things have intense consequences and certain things have lower consequences, and the
lower consequences in the minds of Catholics, or lower consequences just physically, psychologically, or objectively.
I would say both, like both in the eyes of Catholics and in the eyes of just the secular world. So like murder. I think a Catholic would acknowledge that murder is a more grave sin than like doing drugs. Because like one is you're actively ending a life, the other one is you're damaging your own life. It's the same. It's a similar concept of damage, but it's like one is much more extreme than the other.
Yeah.
So that's.
Do you remember how we got here from differences between religions?
So we're talking about martyrdom. And the idea is, like, how do you know you're right in being a martyr? Like, going to the extreme to defend your faith and your belief. And so, like, that's...
so Christianity is not unique in people going to extreme lengths for their perception of their faith.
Yes, but the fact that we are nonviolent about it, and that segues into Section 2.
Okay.
Nonviolence and pacifism.
Okay.
Catholics are fundamentally against violent conflict in pretty much all ways. So even our worst enemies, we won't kill them. We if possible. Like it's one of those things where like yes, the Catholic Church has an acknowledgement that you're allowed to defend yourself. So theoretically, a Catholic can justifiably end a life if it's self-defense, but but that's like the extreme case. But I'm saying that in pretty much all other cases, we don't have the moral authority to end lives or to even like do violence at all. So
yeah, I agree.
And I think that's a great thing linked to what we were talking about before with martyrdom and like going to an extreme where we have fundamentally limited ourselves in the degree of how extreme we can go in our response to a thing we perceive as evil.
Yeah, I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with that based on my experiences of Catholics, based on my experiences of Christians. Do you think that scales beyond our experiences? Do you think that's true across the globe, and do you think that's true historically, or do you think
I think that it's
true right now?
So the idea is okay, just as like to put this in a very philosophical, logical context, is the idea that Christians are pacifist true across the board? Or is there exceptions to this that may disqualify it as equality of Christians?
Well, that's what I mean statistically. I can't talk right now. I mean, like on average, do you think it's true on average right now? And do you think it's true on average across the board? And do you think it's true on average across history? There's exceptions.
I would say that majority of Christians are nonviolent, for sure, across history. Have there been violent Christians? Of course. There have been violent Buddhists, there have been violent Jains. Yeah. Jainism, literally the entire point of the religion is all life is sacred, Yeah.
Well,
even bugs are sacred to Jains.
That's why I said on average.
But I think on average, it has because the core of Christianity is nonviolence, that has deeply affected the population of Christians to seek peace rather than war, more so than they would have if they had not been Christian. And fundamentally, I don't have a time machine. I can't go back and make 10 billion different alternate realities where I test this and get statistics. But I think that you have a lot of situations like that have improved things. So, for example, I'm trying to think of some areas where Christianity has resulted in a nonviolent solution to something.
My first thought was
could have been violent, much more so.
Yeah, my first thought is the Inquisition, where, for example, church inquisitors were really nice towards gay people, even though being like homosexuality was against civil law.
Yeah.
And so, and another example would be witch trials. So
Actually,
towards
fun fact, listeners, the Protestants were the ones who did most of the witch burnings. Even though the meme is always the Malleus Maleficarum, the hammer of witches, Catholic inquisitors were fairly gentle towards people accused of witchcraft.
They were, and witchcraft, witch killings, that kind of peaked as the Inquisition was dying out. And you actually see some interesting statistics where if you look at places where geographically where the Inquisition was still intact, almost no witches were killed there because they would look at the cases and throw them out because there's no evidence of witchery.
Yeah.
And then outside of the Inquisition, that's where all the witch burnings and drownings were happening.
Exactly. And furthermore, this is kind of a thing of, I don't have actual statistical evidence of this, but there would be a lot of conflicts where the Pope would just literally mediate disputes between rulers and nobles, and be like, you'd have two nobles want to kill each other over some land, and the Pope would just step in and be like, this guy is the true ruler of this land, you have to accept this, you know, and they would. And
actually, for listeners, there's a book I'd recommend. It's called Bearing False Witness. I'm drawing a blank on the author. He's a Protestant historian, and he wrote a book kind of defending the church against false accusations just in the name of history.
Yeah.
And so he walks through the Inquisition and the Crusades and anti-Semitism and the church's supposed support for authoritarian governments. And he kind of walks through all these examples, and he's very well cited. It's just a very academic book, and I would recommend it. That's kind of where I'm getting my stuff on the Inquisition.
Yeah,
is from him.
And I don't want this to become a talk of, okay, what are all the perceived wrongs done by the church, and how do we defend them? That's another talk we can do sometime.
I think this was defending the larger point of
non-violence,
Catholic pacifism.
Yeah, and especially in the modern day, I think pacifism is big in the modern day among Catholics. All the nonviolent protests, people always talk about, but what about those people who bomb abortion clinics and stuff like that? And it's do you know how few of those there are?
Yeah.
Especially related to other religious extremism.
Right.
It's extremely low. I think the only example right now of Christian extremists is mostly I think in Nigeria or Uganda or something like that. There's the Lord's Army. Mm-hmm. That there are a bunch of Christian extremists who are literally just okay, we just have a warlord who wants to own the country. So, and I think they're the ones doing the child soldiers and stuff. If you remember, Coney was one of them. If you remember Coney 2012. But, yeah.
So I think we're kind of closing the loop on this.
Non-violence.
In the general question of what makes Christianity different, then we went down the rabbit hole of martyrdom, dying for truth, and non-violence. Yeah.
I have a few more, but I don't know if we have enough time.
Oh yeah, we're good for now. We got another 37 minutes.
Okay, perfect.
Is there one that hits closer to your experiences, or is that those examples? Are those really close to your experience?
No.
There's a
this is the one that holds really close to me.
Yeah.
Although this is one that's not agreed upon by all Catholics, but I'm not Catholics, all Christians. Is confession and forgiveness of sins.
Okay.
Because Protestants generally don't acknowledge confession, but Orthodox Christians and Catholics do. And most Coptics and other kinds of traditionalist Christians. Mm-hmm. And what that means is there is a framework within the religion to formally absolve you of your sins. Mm-hmm. And I think that is legendary. I think that is one of the most beautiful things that you could have encoded into your faith.
Yeah.
That you're not, most other religions basically say, okay, if you did something bad, you generally kind of have to have a vague sense of hope that, okay, God will either forgive you or consider your good deeds to have made up for your bad deeds,
Yeah.
I think Islam has a way to do confession, but it's extremely niche. You have to go on this like spiritual retreat where you, I forgot what the word was called, but you have to basically go on this retreat. It's kind of like rehab for sin with Muslims, and but the idea is you're really only supposed to do it like once in your life, and if you mess it up, like, and you fall back, it's extremely bad.
Yeah, I think this is a case where detractors focus so much on the exception that they forget about the rule.
Yes.
So I think people who look at confession are going to talk about, well, hey, if someone confesses to pedophilia, they can't say anything about it, and they focus on minutia that applies to a very tiny proportion of people.
Yes.
But I think when you focus on that, you forget the rule, the normal, and you forget how powerful the norm is for most people most of the time.
Exactly.
And
because
the norm for most people most of the time, in my mind, is this whole attitude of all the bad stuff you did, which again for most people really isn't that bad.
Yeah.
It's I gossiped, I was talking shit about someone behind their back, or I masturbated or something. Again, for most people most of the time, it's their sins aren't that bad. And so, if this idea of your sins are gone, get up, you have a life to live. Do
exactly.
it. That's the attitude. And that's that's so invigorating.
Yeah, it's literally God loves you, God forgives you. Now go out into the world and do the good that he wants you to do. Yeah. Don't dwell on the sins of your past. Take this moment to acknowledge that you are truly forgiven.
Yeah.
And that if you usually the caveat is if you go out and just sin more and you weren't actually meaning it, it's not valid. But the point is, like, if you actually mean it and you go out and be a good person from then on, those sins are truly forgotten. Like, those are not forgotten, but, like, forgiven. So the idea is, like, you have that true opportunity for true redemption. And that is, like, something that is absolutely beautiful to me.
Yeah, no, I know a couple people who ended up getting like addicted to pornography, and that was definitely a path I started going down in like high school, but I didn't, and the reason I didn't was because of confession.
Yeah,
I would say it's this whole attitude of no, that's gone. What you did last week, forget about it. Get up, you have a life to live. Go live it, and that attitude stopped me from going all the way into like an addiction. I would just from my experience.
Because if you don't have that opportunity to clean your slate, you oftentimes will get stuck in this mental struggle of like, I'm weak and I can't help myself and I've already been a sinner. What's the point of adding more sins onto the plate?
For sure.
And if you can clean yourself, like objectively clean yourself with there's no like, BS of like okay, you think God forgives you, or like God might forgive you. Like there's no like uncertainty. God has forgiven you. It is so liberating and empowering.
For sure. So did you have anything else in mind when it comes to making Catholicism, Christianity unique or do you think we hit the major highlights so far? I think
those are my major ones.
Because I have a way to segue this into a slightly different conversation for the next 20 minutes.
The other thing is a little more minor thing, and that is culture. Where basically the idea is like, okay, let's say I'm a Catholic. Why would I be a Roman Catholic versus like, a Ukrainian Catholic or something like that? Like, which rite do I pick, or like which masses do I go to?
Yeah, it's because we're Polish.
Yeah, we're two Polacks here. So like we were raised in a certain way, and I think that there is a degree of moral responsibility to celebrate your culture and to try to like keep it living. Like it's not as degree of like it's not the same as like okay. The same kind of moral prerogative as don't murder or something like that, but like I do think that.
How do you think it compares to being a citizen of the country you're a citizen of?
It depends. So I think that I believe in synthesis of ideas. So the idea is like I'm a Polish American.
Mm-hmm.
if someone asks me, what are you? I'm a Polish American.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not fully Polish and I'm not fully American. I'm a Polish American. So I've taken the ideas of Poland and synchronized them. Syncretize them is the correct word,
Mm-hmm.
with that of America, the place where I live.
There's a lot of overlap though, between Polish and Americans. You got what, faith, family, freedom,
liberty, yeah,
fuck communism.
yeah, of course. But like, so like it's easier for me, and that's the thing, is that's actually something that I think is part of the reason why, like, you see in the modern day, like a lot of more recent immigrants, they're from more different countries. So like people who grew up in like China or like India or Africa or the Middle East, moving into like America, I think they struggle more so to adapt to American culture because their origin culture is so different. So for when I say it, it's kind of I had an easy time of it to syncretize my beliefs.
Yeah.
But I like fundamentally, I think that like you have a degree of responsibility to your neighbors in where you're living to acknowledge and tip your hat to their beliefs, but also you have an obligation to your family and your ancestors to try to like propagate their belief too. And the idea is, and then fundamentally there's a reasonable compromise in the middle there.
Yeah,
where like I like the way it's funny, the quote I always gave to my brother is, at the heat death of the universe, I want one, weird genetic, robot humanoid to have in its database how to speak Polish.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Like at the heat, I don't want like my heritage and history to die and be forgotten.
Yeah.
And I think that's responsible for all cultures. I don't want anyone's culture to die or be forgotten. Yeah. I dislike the globalist kind of narrative of like, okay, everyone has to give up their culture and ideas to assimilate all together into one homogenous mix. I disagree with that, but that's a whole other discussion.
Well, I think the answer to that is American culture, when it's done well, is a meta culture. Because it's not a homogenous thing. It's a bunch of subcultures trying to get along.
Exactly.
And trying to live on the same island.
Even like take like someone from like Connecticut and compare them to someone from California. Very different culture.
Well, just look at New Britain. It's a third Italian, a third Polish, and a third Puerto Rican.
Take a guy from New Haven, compare them to a guy from like Preston, Connecticut. Like even within the same state, within a very short distance from each other, you'll have people with very different culture and ideas.
Right. And I think when America is working on all four cylinders, those people are living cooperatively while maintaining their own subculture.
Yeah, and I think segueing that back into Catholicism, I think that Catholicism to me has a special value in that it feels like a meta culture that I want to persist.
Yeah. No, I get the same sense too.
Yeah, that like I was born into this, and I have of course like you're not imprisoned by this. I don't think that if someone who's born into a religion is morally obligated to stay in the religion they were born into, but like if you believe that your religion is good and strong, you want to propagate its traditions. Because I could take Catholicism, strip away all the theology. And strip away and keep the theology, but remove everything else. And I get, like it wouldn't be the same. When you go into a church and you and the church is just like a white a white room with just like no culture and flavor to it. There's it's lost its soul. Like when for example when you. Do you mean for example if imagine if there was if all masses were done in English from now and forever just because it's the universal language, like that I think that'd be bad. I think there should always be Latin masses sung from now until till the end of time, just because that is our culture and heritage of how the mass used to be. And that's kind of my point, is like you can't, certain elements of the culture should not be stripped away just because it's easy. We should have certain traditions intact. And I'm not saying that like all traditions are equal, because like I've like like I'm fine with like I'm not someone who's like, oh, Vatican II was trash, and I the priest should have his back to me at all times because it's the way to, that's how they did it in the old days. I'm not like that. I'm just saying that like the soul of Catholicism has to keep going. And if you strip everything away for utilitarian reasons, that's not good.
Yeah, I think that maybe that's a case where utilitarianism fails to serve utilitarian goals. where if you take away the soul, it fails its mission.
Exactly.
And it's a kind of a weird...
It's a paradox.
Yeah. I'm not sure where to go after this.
Yeah, well, that was basically the final point I had about like why I am a Catholic, like why I would say like I particularly would want to stay a Christian and a Catholic, despite like my intellectual spiritualism feeling less bounded towards like less bounded in terms of its moral framework.
No, I've often felt the same way, where I feel 95% Catholic. But I still want the Catholic bit. I don't want to throw away the Catholic identity and the Catholic mission.
Yeah, because like I could probably cobble together the same beliefs and theology in a Buddhist or like Muslim framework, but it's just one of those things where it's like the Catholic soul matters to me, and that's the point. That was the point of this whole discussion. Like if I were to like convert to like Islam, I'd lose those things that make Catholicism and Christianity so unique.
So do you think it's unique because it's unique, or do you think it's unique because it's yours?
No. I think it's unique because it is unique. Mm-hmm. But my specific brand of Christianity is unique because it's mine. And what that means is like, when I say grace with a prayer that I wrote myself, that's unique because it's me. Mm-hmm. I think Catholicism is unique because it is unique.
Okay.
Like, I don't think it's like unique just because I'm the one who is like commanding it, or using it.
Yeah. I'd say we got about 20 minutes to go.
All right. So you had another topic you wanted to segue into.
Well, we're kind of segueing into a different place that it might be worth bringing up, and it's more related to what we were talking about, which is when I was in college, I had a very apologetics-minded brain where I tried to memorize arguments for God's existence and for the historicity of the resurrection, and I tried to recite them. And I started to realize that didn't stick with people, and so what did stick with people was when I was able to talk about my experiences, and that's kind of why I asked you the question, like which of the uniquenesses of Catholicism hits close to your own experiences, and I think there's a way of talking about the faith from the perspective of your own experiences, which is very compelling to people and very useful for communicating. And so that's what I was gravitating towards. And then I read G.K. Chesterton's book, Orthodoxy. He stole all my ideas. Or Orthodoxy is literally a romp around the human experience. Like, hey, let's talk about ethics, and hey, let's talk about nature, and let's talk about politics, and let's talk about relationships.
Didn't he talk about cheese?
And I'm sure he did, and all manner of nonsense, but he was just gallivanting around, the landscape of his own life, and he was explaining how his faith illuminated all of those areas. And the idea is when you put all the areas together, well, you get G.K. Chesterton. And so, you see how the faith was just this umbrella covering his whole landscape of experience. And so it's like, you get through the book and it's like, I get why G.K. Chesterton is Catholic. And I can try and see, when I try to see things from his experience, I could also see myself being Catholic. And that's a lot more powerful than abstract arguments in many ways. It's not a
Yes.
substitute, and but for good philosophy, it's not a substitute, but it's like it's very powerful. And I think the way you and me were talking today about the faith was in a way that's it's like this is how I see the faith, and this is how I see it playing out in different areas of life. Whether it's like my conception of the value of truth and my conception of the value of dying for something you believe in, but also how I see, confession, how I see, my identity, my cultural identity in my faith. And it's like I'm starting to get a sense of like I understand why you're Catholic. And I get why it makes sense for you to be Catholic, just hearing you out.
Yeah.
And that's a more powerful argument in many ways than actual arguments, And
Yeah.
so what my goal is to I don't know my goal, but like my project is trying to turn that into an argument.
Okay. Well, the idea is fundamentally that is a subjective argument. So you're kind of building a castle on sand here, you know.
No, I don't think I am, because I think everything is based off experience.
Well,
Even the scientific method. The scientific method is based off scientists sharing experiences with each other and then agreeing that they had the same experience.
Well, the scientific method is generally the method that we use to create and proliferate science, but it may not necessarily be the most efficient method possible. Like, and I don't know enough about it to argue anything. There might but my point is that when you talk about experiences are fundamentally a subjective component, and so the idea is like when you say like, hey, you are this religion because of your experiences, that's fundamentally based in your subjective experiences. So
I
you
kind of
get
disagree. I think an experience.
maybe I'm not understanding you well.
Well, the way I think of an experience as a data point.
Okay.
Like, what are you experiencing right now, true or false? It's a data point. It is what it is. You can try and articulate it imperfectly, and I could categorize it imperfectly, and that's why it's so messy. Because
Yeah.
you might say something to me about how you experienced the gift of tongues, and I just might be looking at what's going on in your brain, and I could try and replicate this in a monkey.
Yeah.
And it's like I've probably miscategorized your experience. And
Yeah.
I'm probably missing something. But that's just what makes the science of it messy. That doesn't mean that your experience isn't objectively a data point.
Yeah, okay. I get what you're saying. But my thought is, are you saying that would your final ambition be to say that Catholicism is objectively true, or are you trying to say that religion has an objective place? Is it more so my question?
I'm trying to get there.
Okay.
So what I'm trying to say is, like,
Are you
let's...
are you just trying to build a framework to begin with?
Yeah. I'm trying to build a highway, because I think G.K. Chesterton has a bunch of cars, and I'm trying to build the highway where his cars make sense.
Okay.
What I mean by his cars, I mean, let's talk about politics and how my faith influences that. And then G.K. Chesterton also says, let's talk about my relationships and how my faith influences that. And G.K. Chesterton also says, hey, let's talk about ethics and how my faith illuminates that. Those are a
Okay.
bunch of cars.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, what's the highway that they make sense on?
Okay, so my thought is you have data points. You don't know necessarily how to classify the data, but you want to fit a line that makes sense to all the data points.
Exactly. And I think I'm closing in on one.
Okay. That's interesting, because if you can do and so in that case the line would be Catholicism. That like
No, the line would... Well, no, I can't get that far yet.
Okay, because my thought is like you have these experiences that are, you classify in some way, like you ascribe some sort of like features to them, and the idea is you might be able to say if your line of experiences looks like this, you are a Catholic. If your line looks like this, you are a Protestant, or if your line looks like this, you might be a Buddhist or whatever. that's my guess of what you see, what like useful nature might be going on in
Mostly.
your thing.
So the way I would set this up is to say, who are you? And you are two things. You are the sum of all your experiences plus all the different ways you've categorized your experiences.
Huh. Well, wouldn't that be an experience within itself?
That would be one of the ways you've categorized your experiences, I think.
The distinction seems a little murky, but I get it. Because like when you said that, I thought you were gonna say the sum of all your experiences and the sum of all of your like basic material. So like what that means is like your genetics, your flesh, your bones, and all that.
I would say those are experiences.
Okay.
So I would say an experience is a singular data point of consciousness.
Okay, so you're abstracting it even that far.
Yeah, I would say literally an instantaneous slice of consciousness.
Okay, all right.
That's an experience. And the way you categorize your experiences is like, let's take a bunch of slices. Let's integrate between 7:20 and 7:30.
Yeah.
And that integral of experiences is me driving to the gas station.
Yeah.
That's a categorization of experience.
Yes. I see. Okay, I see.
And so that's what I mean by you are the sum of your experiences plus the way you categorize them.
Okay. So like I could categorize it as this is a trip to the gas station, but I could instead categorize it as as something else. So like
you could
although in that case like you could categorize it as you could split it up into minor categories potentially.
Exactly.
So you could be like, this is 10 minutes of a jaunt through town in the car plus 5 minutes of going to exploring a store and looking at the wonderful goods that are in a gas station,
or robbing it.
And
and if you categorize it that way, you're a very different person.
Yeah, and I see that because let's say like you're like a shoplifter. Like let's say you have that like people have like shoplifting addictions. Someone might for one person, shoplifting might be like, oh geez, I can't believe I did that. Oh my, like what have I done?
Yeah.
Like an intensely negative experience to have either accidentally done it or have felt the need to do it on purpose.
Right.
Other people might be like they might not even acknowledge it. They might be like, oh yeah, I took it.
Yeah.
They either might give it no thought, or they might be like, oh yeah, I wanted it, so I took it.
Yeah.
Or they might justify it. They might be like, oh, Jeff Bezos owns this store. He makes $10 billion. He wouldn't notice if I took one jacket or something like that,
Yeah.
Like that kind of thing. Like everyone the same experience of just shoplifting can be categorized in so many different ways that it will affect your reactions to it, even though it's the same act.
Right.
I get it.
And so that's why I say you're not only your experiences, but you're the way you've categorized them too.
Yes.
And I would also say that what happens when you integrate over your categories of experience? That's probably very close to your self-concept.
That, I don't know if that's even something that is mathematically something I can understand. That's something that might be beyond me. That might be like on a different order of mathematics. Something non-Euclidean. I'll say it again just because in case the mic didn't pick it up. But
he laid down on the bed.
Yeah. That doesn't sound like normal mathematics. That feels like something beyond me, something non-Euclidean. And the idea is like,
but
you're integrating over features, which means you're ascribing features to features themselves.
So don't think about this too mathematically. Think about this as you are literally a mosaic of your categories of experience.
Yeah.
And that's your identity.
Yeah. Yes.
Which is an abstract person.
I get that.
And so that's what I mean by saying, so you integrate over the human experience. So let's say you integrate over your experiences, and that's physically you, let's say. That's your substrate. Yeah. But then you integrate over your categories of experience, and that's your perception of yourself.
Yes.
And then when you
and
let's
then you
go
integrate that.
no. Let's go one level higher, which is the principles by which these abstractions are true. So here's what I mean. You have a whole bunch of experiences of nature, right?
Yeah.
And the principles by which they're true is physics.
Yes.
And then you have experiences that certain situations are right or wrong, or certain behaviors are right and wrong. And you have principles governing those, which are ethical principles.
Yeah.
Let's posit their existence for now.
Yes.
And then you have relationships where I'm interacting with people, and I have patterns of understanding how relationships work, how friendships work, how romantic relationships work, and how my relationships with my family works. These all work differently. These all work by different patterns, which means these all work by different principles at this sort of third level of abstraction. Okay. So what I'm getting at is there's a level of substrate, there's a level of base experience, and then above that there's an abstract level of how you've categorized your experiences as natural or ethical or relational, or this has to do with my purpose or happiness in life or my career, or my romance, or so you have categories of life.
Hobbies.
But then even above that you have a third level of abstraction, which are first principles, which govern all the categories.
I see.
And so when you integrate over the substrate level, that's like literally physically you. When you integrate over your own categories of experience, which are kind of intermediate categories, that's your perception of yourself.
I wish I could, for the viewers, I can make like a chart of this.
I made this in a video and I put it on YouTube.
Okay.
And then when you integrate over the first principles, that's God. Okay. Why is that God? Because it's integrating over the whole categories of a human experience. Therefore, it's an abstract person.
Okay.
And that's why we look up to the sky and think there's a person up there.
Yeah.
That's my highway that I'm trying to build.
Okay, I can see, because my thought is like, all of from a more mathematical perspective, which I know you're saying to kind of distance yourself. Like, you've got the experience; those are data points, which are basically some sort of equation of parameters plus some noise, which noise is just random, like randomness to it. So, like, like when you accidentally stubbed your toe, that adds something new to that experience that wasn't there, that would have normally not been there.
Yeah.
And you didn't plan for that. That was just random that you stubbed your toe. So the idea is like, and I'm not. We can have another talk later about determinism, but that like you were part of the equation is that you were going to stub your toe. But the idea is it's a measurements of an equation plus randomness. When you could pull up and you can extract those parameters that are creating those experiences. And then those parameters are they themselves equations of other parameters. And you basically go all the way to the root of all creation.
Yes.
The root parameters. These are just like there. And then these parameters define everything else.
Yeah, and in kind of in your language, what I would say is when you look at the sum of all the root parameters, that's something like God, because it's sort of, the reason I say God is because this necessarily governs all the human experience. That's how you derive those parameters, was abstracting a couple levels above the whole of your experience.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's personal.
It's one of those things where it's like, it is the root, like it has no cause. It is just there.
Yeah. If once you get comfortable with that idea, you can start making concepts about how it's all powerful, because you have this perception that it's the first principle of everything.
Yeah.
And therefore it causes things, and therefore it seems all powerful. But future discussion.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think
it's something that's interesting to explore. My only thought is it feels like an overly it feels like you're trying to push the frame of life experiences into a mathematical framework, and I don't know if that's something that can work. You're like, you could be functioning within a Galois field of non-linear mathematics. Everything could be completely different, and you may not even know it. And that's the thing, is like, and like, meanwhile, you're trying to like, it's like you're trying to, I'm worried you might be trying to take a square block and shove it into the circle hole, where the square block being life experiences and the circle block being a logical framework. You may have to explore outside of it.
Well, that all comes down to how our perceptions of reality map onto reality.
Yeah.
And that's the ultimate question.
Yeah, and
as far as whether or not this whole line of argument is actually true.
Yeah.
It's going to come down to that for sure.
Mm.
Although I think this is what this does accomplish. It accomplishes why human beings are in the business of believing in God, and why human beings are in the business of categorizing their experiences that way.
Of course. Like, I think, like, even from, like, a completely secular atheistic perspective, there's value in pursuing knowledge about basically the source of all creation and the root. Like, I think that theology is a science in its own way.
It's an ology.
Like, yeah, or like philosophy, you know. I think that, like, they're both, like, a form of science, but just of more abstract ideas. And unfortunately, they have, in the current state of things, they have less objective practical value than, like you know, more hard sciences. It is just because, like, you know, with like engineering, I could build a smartphone that can do many amazing things that would be considered magic in another time period.
With theology, maybe you could end slavery, right?
Yeah, I guess that though is its own kind of reward. Yeah. And that's kind of the thing. I will say here, objectively, ending slavery was good. Don't take that as like an out of context thing. But like, the point is, like, we're in this state. We've kind of because we can make things like smartphones with engineering, we value that so highly, and we lose sight of how theology and philosophy are so important, and that they can do things like end slavery, things that are massively important, or like, you know.
I don't know.
Like liberate like the economy from like a complete totalitarianism, or like create democracy and things like that. Like, there's so many ways that like philosophy and theology have like impacted the way human beings interact that we don't really acknowledge.
Well, I wonder the extent to which people who won wars won them because they were more scientifically advanced, and therefore were incentivized to think scientifically.
I think it depends on the time period.
Okay.
I think certain time periods more scientific. For example, like the Franco-Prussian War. Like, obviously the Germans won because they were more scientifically minded over the French at the time. But like you know, you could argue that most colonial wars were won that way too, just because one side had more technology and they approached warfare from a more scientific perspective. But if you go back to, like, I don't know, say like the 100 Years' War, I don't think that had anything to do with like real like scientific mindedness. I think it was just kind of like, it was more so a perspective of the will of the people and how far they were willing to fight for like what they thought they should be fighting for, you know. So like with the 100 Years' War, whether you felt you were French or English, you know, and you wanted to fight for that idea, not that even nationalism was much of a thing back then, you know, but like, or like your sense of loyalty to whichever king, like, you know, I think it was more so a battle of wills.
I like how nuanced our conversations get.
Yeah, that's why I love having them.
Yeah, I think people are gonna start rolling in, so I think that's probably a good time to wrap it up. But
all right. Yeah, I didn't get to talk about demons today, but that demons will come up soon.
All right, next time we talk, it'll be demons. I promise.
All right.